Hello again, everybody. It's time for the Silver Bullets podcast, and I'm Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnick.
And Chip, we have a 2-0 Buckeye team right now after a pasting of Rutgers, 52-3. What do you think of that? I mean, were you satisfied with the drubbing on one of the worst teams in the Big Ten?
Yeah, completely satisfied, and I have to admit, not completely surprised. The talent differential is pretty substantial between Rutgers and Ohio State, and I think that was clearly evident for everyone, either in the stadium or for watching it on television. If anything, it came out. I thought Rutgers, they were kind of coming into a disadvantage with their secondary missing, some of their best players. But even I think, let's be fair. I think Ohio State still would have, beaten them, even with those players healthy in the secondary. And, I haven't seen or read anything about the status of Art Sitkowski, the freshman quarterback who was knocked out of the game by Nick Bosa late in the first half. So I hope he's doing well. Genuinely, I think. It would bode well for Rutgers to become bowl eligible with Sitkowski at quarterback. But getting back to your question, it was not surprising, and it was definitely satisfying that Ohio State is starting off the season 2-0.
What about the defense, Chip? What do you think about bouncing back from a tough? Kind of a tough outing for the D against Oregon State. Can we even take anything from this Rutgers game as any kind of evidence that the defense was better this week or not?
That's a really good question. I want to say that the defense did bounce back. I thought the secondary played better against Rutgers than they did against Oregon State. I think a lot of that can be attributed to the return of Jordan Fuller in the secondary. Also the inclusion of Sean Wade, which as a part-time contributor, in the nickel package. I'm still not, obviously the pass rush is ferocious with Chase Young and Nick Bosa, and I'm still concerned about the linebackers. Maybe you have a different opinion.
No, I think if you look at this game, the one area of the defense that didn't look that much improved probably was the linebacking core, although we did see a little more of Tough Borland this week, and I think that when he was on the field, you could sense a bit of a difference. I thought Pete Werner looked like he had, maybe took a step forward, but there were still plays where he kind of ran himself out of the play, and times when he maybe didn't look quite as sharp. But I think that overall, you look at 3 levels of the defense, the linebacking core has to be the biggest concern for now for Ryan Day, and then for Urban Meyer after this week.
I guess a question I have for you is it just me, or does it seem that Baron Browning is out of position at that middle linebacker spot?
Yeah, I don't know that he's taken really well to that middle, the Mike spot there. I don't think that he is. I don't know how much of it he played in high school, but in high school you can get away with just being really athletic and big and fast, whereas you can't at this level. It's certainly not smooth, we'll put it that way. And I know that Raekwon McMillan had some issues early in his career, but so hopefully this is something that can be coached up in him, and he's going to be needed.
I agree, and I also believe this coming week against TCU, it might be more of a circumstance with going against a team that, they may force Ohio State into more of a traditional nickel defense most of the time. So I'm not sure how much Tough Borland or Baron Browning might be playing against a TCU. But I guess that would be, in terms of a takeaway, it would be a concern that the linebackers still, as you said, like they sometimes run themselves out of the play. That in terms of play recognition, they're not, filling the hole. I guess you could say, being a longtime Ohio State fan, that's one of the things that, regardless of whether we're talking during the Urban Meyer era or any of the coaching staffs that preceded it, you've grown accustomed to strong linebacker play, and it just seems like that might be the weak link on this otherwise pretty stout Ohio State defense.
Yeah, and it's kind of bizarre because it's not that they don't have athletes at the position. It's just that they're not performing, the way you would hope they would. I can't remember if it was the Ohio State game or another game. I watched quite a bit of football over the weekend. But one of the things that stood out to me, and one of the analysts pointed this out, whichever game it was, when you're a grumpy old Buckeye like me, they kind of blend together sometimes, was they showed this linebacker, and the comment was that he started to attack the line of scrimmage and then slowed up, and that slowing up allowed him to flow better and to get to the proper spot. You don't see that with Ohio State linebackers. You see them, sprinting to a position, and it's not always the right position. Sometimes gap responsibility breaks down, and I think sometimes it's kind of like for NASCAR fans, if they watch races like on a flat track or slippery track, sometimes you have to slow down to go faster. It's kind of counterintuitive, but sometimes you actually have to slow down what you're doing to better judge what's coming up, on the football field. And I think that maybe Ohio State is just being, these players are not as experienced, and I think maybe they're just a little overeager, a little aggressive, and it's kind of biting them right now. Maybe they just need to, take that first quick step, but then see what's going on. Maybe pump the brakes a little, and then see what's going on and where they need to be. And I think that they might be able to fix things by doing that.
Well, I definitely like the analogy of with regards to NASCAR. The one thing I also agree that it's not a question of talent. I mean, every one of these linebackers that are on the roster were heavily recruited, could have played for just about any college program in the country. Mm-hmm. And, Baron Browning is certainly no exception to that. The one thing that I would say about Tough Borland is that, and this is not meant to be disparaging of his athletic ability, it's just that in comparison to a Baron Browning, I'm sure that, I think that Tough Borland compensates with better instincts and anticipation. That would be probably how I would characterize his play at middle linebacker. So I think you're onto something, though, that I think that they need to slow down in order to go faster. I think that would definitely benefit them as a group when it comes to their overall linebacker play.
Yeah, because the one thing that stands out is the defensive line play. These guys are eating up blockers, and they should have the ability to get where they need to be because of, my goodness, the way Landers played on Saturday was unbelievable. I mean, he was just chewing guys up. And I think that if you've got linemen like Ohio State has, you would do well to just let them do their jobs and then read off of that and go figure out where you need to be, because that's the thing is if that running back gets past the first wave of attack of defense, a lot of times there is no second wave, and then it's off into the secondary where they have to make the plays. A safety or a cornerback has to make the play. So it's take advantage of that line. That would be my advice to the linebackers. I think you're right about Borland. I mean, I know you're trying to be diplomatic. He's not the physical specimen that Baron Browning is, but he seems to be maybe has the higher football IQ at this point in his career.
Yeah, and one of the positives of that defensive line, not only the quality players, but the quality depth that Ohio State possesses. Now, I have to confess, I'm not sure how liberally Coach Johnson will be able to substitute against TCU, because similar to Ohio State, they like to play at a fast tempo. The rotation of personnel may not be as conducive to Coach Johnson's wishes as he was able to against Oregon State and Rutgers. Well, one of the positives that I saw, and this just speaks to the superior coach that Larry Johnson is as a defensive line coach, was late in the game. The game was well decided in Ohio State's favor, and during the telecast, watching Coach Johnson on the sideline actively coaching the defensive line, even though the backups were in, the game was well decided, but there were 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter, and he was still, he was still on the players that were in the game, no matter what the score, no matter the fact that Ohio State was going to win the game. It just, if anything, the fact that Ohio State has such a tremendous coach and Larry Johnson on the staff, I can see why the defensive linemen that Ohio State has recruited and are continuing to recruit, why they would want to come and play for such an outstanding coach.
Yeah, it's an embarrassment of riches in that coaching staff for sure. If you look at Ryan Day as an assistant, even though he's been acting as head coach, Kevin Wilson, former head coach, Greg Schiano, former head coach at the NFL and college levels. Larry Johnson has been at the top of his profession in terms of position coaches for many years. It's kind of ridiculous, and now you can add Brian Hartline doing a great job to that.
Yeah, Brian Hartline is definitely, you can see the fruits of his labor, but I don't want to take away from, I think one of the most underrated, maybe it's just one person's opinion, one of the most underrated coaches on the staff, in the sense that I think Ohio State fans have just kind of taken him for granted, is Kevin Wilson. And what I mean by that is, in the background, like everyone keeps talking about Ryan Day, and as well they should. But, when, well over a year ago, everyone was so excited, to have a coach like Kevin Wilson added to the staff. And the next thing he's kind of the forgotten man. But I think his influence on the offense, maybe it was delayed a year because of the fact that, JT Barrett was still on the roster, and that's not to take anything away from JT Barrett. He holds just about every Ohio State major passing record in the record book. But I think, Wilson and Day, their influence on the offense, we've seen it through the first couple games of the 2018 season.
Absolutely, and Alex Grinch obviously is another coach that I didn't even mention before. He's a guy who could have gone anywhere in the country. So, just a great staff that Urban Meyer has put together. Now that certain people have departed, and hopefully we'll see some of the effects of that staff this season. I think we're already seeing quite a bit of the effects of the coaching staff on this group, because there are a lot of young players playing at a high level. And, let's start with the quarterbacks, though. The quarterbacks this week, of course, Dwayne Haskins is out there doing Dwayne Haskins things and just deadly accurate, had a great game. And then he gets shown up by his backup, Tate Martell, who comes out and goes 10 for 10 and almost runs for 100 yards.
Yeah, Tate Martell, I was happy to see not only the running. I think Ohio State fans kind of expected, maybe not, that final touchdown that he ran. I think Ohio State fans expected that running element, but as you said, the 10 for 10, that's more reassuring, I think, for an Ohio State fan, the fact that, all right, in the event that Dwayne Haskins, if he was not able to play, that Ohio State has a very capable backup who I think it would be fair to say could arguably be starting for almost any other team in the Big Ten. I realize we're an Ohio State-oriented podcast, and we're going to be looking at things through Buckeye-colored glasses, with a lot of bias. But I thought Tate Martell represented himself well, especially after he took that hard shot on the sideline, that kind of, knocked him out for a play. Mm-hmm. But he came right back, and I thought that was very impressive. If anything, and this is not meant to discourage Tate Martell from playing his game, but hopefully that not only, Tate Martell used that for motivation, but also he'll get to, when he's on the sidelines or approaching the sidelines, to get out of get out of bounds that much faster, because other opponents will be eager to try and put those kind of hard licks on him, fair or not, to knock him out of the game. So, Tate Martell represented himself very well against Rutgers when he came in and had the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, that was a learning experience, I think, for Tate. And some of that's adjustments. I mean, you're used to running at a certain rate, and you have a certain amount of time you think you have before the defender arrives. At this level, they're going to arrive a little bit quicker. So maybe he was, I'll just take that extra step. Maybe in the future he won't take that extra step and get himself to safety and save himself for another play. But it was good to see him come back. It's good that he was able to continue, and of course, just dazzle everybody with that long touchdown run. That one move that he made to put his foot in the ground and turn upfield was, he just lost everyone on that play. It just, from that point on, you thought that he would probably score, and he did.
And I think he is the element of the offense that Urban Meyer will. I'm not saying that Ryan Day and doesn't necessarily enjoy having Tate Martell, but I think that Tate Martell's skill set is more of what Urban Meyer envisions. The true zone read, spread off offense that he developed in his career, at Bowling Green, at Utah, at Florida, with some of the players that he had at Ohio State. I think that Tate Martell, the fact that he is, such a wizard with, running the ball, and as you said, being able to just make one move and he was off to the races for a touchdown. I think Urban Meyer is going to, be in the coach's ear about, the offensive coordinators when he returns to the sideline in a couple games, about trying to have Tate Martell heavily involved in the offense whenever possible.
Yeah, and that's what it's so good about having him have success early and get this experience, is that, there could be games where the offense might work better with him on the field. If you come across a particularly nasty pass rush that's not allowing Haskins to have time to survey the field and make his throws.
I agree with that. That's true. As Ohio State, they've been very fortunate against Oregon State, against Rutgers, that they have not had a fearsome pass rush to contend with yet. Now, maybe this coming weekend against TCU, that might be a different story.
Yeah, we'll get more into TCU in a minute. I want to definitely talk about. Again, I'm going to go back to the defense a little bit. Of course, it was a big day for Bosa. Every day is a big day when you have Nick Bosa on your field. Chase Young is a guy who is just a freak athlete, and he's going to hurt some people. He's going to absolutely maul some people. Needs to, though, I think, mature up just a little bit. Got a couple of penalties he didn't need to pick up this week. The spike of the ball was a kind of a weak spike, but, I mean, you still can't really put the ref in a position to make that call. And then running out on the field, just a kid being excited, after Sean Wade's interception. And it kind of marred an otherwise good game for Chase. And, I mean, the one thing that sticks out to me about his sack is that, I mean, come on, that was a fumble. And if they had just ruled it that way, it wouldn't have been overturned, but they didn't have evidence to overturn it by not being ruled a fumble. And unfortunately, a couple plays later, it got Sitkowski hurt because Bosa destroyed him.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm glad that you brought up Chase Young. He had a great game. He made some mistakes. Fortunately for Ohio State, they were not anything that were crucial mistakes that cost the Buckeyes in terms of extent. Now I agree with you. That should have been a fumble because it's exactly what it was. But it wasn't anything that cost Ohio State the game. When you look around the Big Ten, go talk to Jeff Brom at Purdue. He's been on the receiving end 2 weeks in a row of bad mistakes that have cost his team. Go talk to Scott Frost at Nebraska, late in the game against Colorado. Mm-hmm. Critical mistakes. So I look at it, the fact that in game one he had a couple offsides plays that extended drives. He had, as you said, he had the unsportsmanlike calls that resulted in him being ejected. Greg Schiano today at the Ohio State press conference said that they want to they don't want to do anything that's going to make Chase Young lose his intensity, but to kind of channel it better. Mm-hmm. So he is certainly making the most of his opportunities. I would just think as an Ohio State fan base, just kind of don't get on the kid. I would rather, if I think Urban Meyer has said it best, if you're going to make mistakes, make them fast. And it seems like that's kind of the way that Chase Young has made his mistakes the first 2 games of the season. But to Greg Schiano's point, let's not lose the intensity, but let's fix those mistakes so that they don't hurt Ohio State at crucial times in a game.
Mm-hmm. I would like to see Chase be a little bit more stout in the run game. On Saturday, he had only 2 solo tackles. Both of them were sacks, and he had a pass breakup. So he's doing some good things. He's making plays, but it would really be great to see him, be in on more plays.
I agree with that. Yeah, especially with some of the teams on the horizon that Ohio State will be playing, being able to. Everyone loves the defensive line when they come up big with sacks, but clogging the running lanes and shutting down the opposition from being able to run the ball, on first and second down, that's equally as important. And as you said earlier, Robert Landers was a force to be reckoned with on the interior of the Ohio State defensive line.
A guy who flashed for me, who I think a lot of people haven't been talking about, is Justin Hilliard. He had 4 total tackles, 3 solos, and an assist. He kind of stood out a little bit for me. We talked about the linebackers not, maybe we talked about him being a little bit of the weakest link of that defense, but Hilliard showed me something this week.
Yeah, Hilliard, he's just, the biggest tough luck story, I think, on that roster with regards to what he's battled in terms of injuries in his Ohio State career. So anytime that he has an opportunity to play and makes the most of it, I'm certainly, I'm happy to see that he played well, like you said, against Rutgers. He flashed sometimes. Hopefully he'll get more opportunities to be in that linebacker rotation.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see, what he can do if he can just stay on the field. Another guy who I think had a little bit of a comeback week was Jocelyn Wint. A little bit better week this week.
Yeah, he didn't earn your enmity, Jocelyn Went. So yeah, he did definitely recovered from what was probably a difficult beginning, but he represented himself well against Rutgers as compared to Oregon State.
And then probably the last guy, we mentioned him already, that we need to probably mention is Shaun Wade. Did a good job out there.
Well, Shaun Wade, I'm encouraged by the fact that his talent is so vast that he is one of these guys who he could contribute at corner, he can contribute at safety, he can be in the nickel package, that he's definitely looking at beyond just this season in terms of, the 2018 season. It's good to see him out there because, he had to give up last year. He was redshirted last year, due to injury. But he's a guy that you could see with the probable departure of Damon Arnett, after this season, you could see Shaun Wade kind of in that Ohio State corner tradition of moving up and possibly being a starter in 2019. He has the talent, and it was great to see him out there, especially with that interception that unfortunately got Chase Young so excited he came out on the field and got that unsportsmanlike conduct.
Yeah, it's good. I always like to see the next guys because, one thing that we have at Ohio State is a lot of guys go pro early, and that's been especially true in the Urban Meyer era with guys leaving school early. So I always want to get a good look at some of the younger guys, and it's always nice to know that they can make plays. So you feel a little bit better when those guys declare,
Yeah, I think Ohio State fans have become very, very complacent with that whole "we don't rebuild, we reload." It's a testament and tribute to the Ohio State coaching staff with the talent that Urban Meyer and his coaches have assembled. But as you said, if anything, one of my favorite traditions during the spring is going to the Ohio State spring game and seeing those players who did not get ample opportunity to play during the regular season, just to see, as you referred to them, kind of like that next group up to see, who are the next stars on the horizon for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, and the spring game is kind of evolved over the years into something that's sort of football-ish rather than football, but it's still a good showcase. I agree with you. Um, you know, I have to know, Chip, are you disappointed that the shutout streak against Rutgers came to an end?
A little, but I feel for Chris Ash because every time that that he has played Ohio State, I mean, it's almost as though it's kind of his progress is so minimal. To be thinking about the fact that you know that all Rutgers has been able to muster in 3 straight years is 3 points. So it's disappointing that Ohio State wasn't able to shut out Rutgers, but I hope for the fans of Rutgers that they will see this through with Chris Ash, because I realize it's not when you're on the receiving end of 52-3, it's very how can you say that there's any improvement? I think from where that program was several years ago before Chris Ash took it over to where it is now, I think that there definitely is improvement. I think, for example, the Rutgers defense, yes, they were being beaten through the air, but I think it was more, kind of the strategy was, all right, it's raining. Let's see how well Ohio State can throw the ball. Let's make it difficult for the Buckeyes to run the ball. Now, granted, Ohio State, they were able to run the ball, but they didn't run nearly as well as they did against Oregon State. So I think the improvement by Rutgers is very minimal in comparison to a team like Ohio State. But I do believe that Rutgers and Chris Ash are getting better, and hopefully the administration will give Chris Ash the time that he needs to make Rutgers into a better team within the Big Ten East.
Yeah, you can kind of see it in his recruiting already that they're getting better level of recruits than they were getting just a few years ago, and I would put Rutgers' run defense and maybe even their pass defense way ahead of Oregon State's.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just think that Ohio State, the talent. I mean, when we referenced Jordan Fuller, there's a kid from New Jersey that they couldn't keep in state. I mean, if they can get the better talent within the state of New Jersey, and that's always been the case, even when Greg Schiano was there.
Mm-hmm.
But keeping the better talent within the state home, rather than letting it escape to Ohio State or Penn State or that team up north or wherever you may want to mention, if you can keep some of that better talent home, I think it's just going to make Rutgers that much more competitive within the Big Ten.
Absolutely. So, I mean, you talked about the loading up the defense to make Ohio State pass in tough weather conditions. That makes it even more impressive to me that Ohio State went 30 of 33 in the air without an interception.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that, all right, this is, okay, pick your poison. And as we said, that Rutgers, they were coming into it a little bit shorthanded. Their secondary was depleted. Plus, they were going up against some very talented wide receivers. It was great to see, Johnny Dixon. It was kind of almost the exact same play. The 2 touchdowns that he had. It seemed like it to me. Watching it, it was like, okay, did they just run the exact same play? But I mean, Johnny Dixon had a great game. I mean, as you said, to go 30 for 33 in. I wasn't there, so I'm going to defer to our colleagues at the Ozone, Tony Gerdeman and Tom Orr, who were there. Watching it on television, it looked like a steady rain was coming down, not necessarily, as bad as anything to cause the game delay that preceded it against Oregon State. But still, I mean, it was, a soggy conditions, which usually does not allow for effective passing. But I think it speaks to the quality of the players that Ohio State has on their rosters, and a quarterback like Dwayne Haskins who can get the ball wherever he wants with that powerful right arm of his.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Johnny Dixon, actually, because, I mean, did you envision Dixon being the go-to deep threat for this team?
No, I think everyone is kind of, maybe it's just me, I think everyone kind of envisioned that role was going to be Paris Campbell. But that's not, hey, I'll take it any way I can get it. Okay, if it's going to be Johnny Dixon, if it's going to be Paris Campbell, if it's going to be KJ Hill, I mean, hey, I look at it like whoever is open and Haskins is making the right read and it results in a big play for a touchdown, I'm thrilled with that.
Absolutely. I am all for it as well. A little bit of a bounce back game for Paris Campbell.
Yes, Paris Campbell. I still say that his skill set is better as a receiver. His skill set is after the reception. I mean that kind of. I'm not much of a video game aficionado, I have to confess. I mean, I don't have the time or the luxury of being able to play, but whatever is the zoom button, it seems like that's where that's Paris Campbell. As soon as he makes that catch, and he just and he's able to turn and go upfield. It seems like his zoom level is something else. That's not to say that he can't get deep, but I definitely think his effectiveness as a receiver is after the catch and being able to explode after the reception.
Yeah, you get him the ball on the move, and if he gets to that edge, it's really difficult to catch him and to run him out of bounds or whatever. But it was nice to see a bounce back after a little bit of a slow game for him against Oregon State. We saw KJ Hill came back out, had 5 more catches this week, but really nothing down the field. It was a very economical 25 yards on his 5 catches. McLaurin wasn't as involved, although he had a 51-yard touchdown. It was good to see Luke Farrell. We got to see a tight end touchdown this week.
Yeah, I mean, Luke Farrell was probably, considering the previous week, Rashad Berry got the one, and from, Luke Farrell was the designated starter, so he was, for him to be included. And I may be mistaken. I thought I read somewhere online that it was Luke Farrell's parents' anniversary on Saturday, so they got to celebrate. I may be mistaken, but got to celebrate their wedding anniversary watching their son earn his first touchdown reception as a Buckeye.
Wow, if that's true, that's a great story, and of course we wish congratulations to the Farrells.
Absolutely, yeah.
It was great. I get excited by tight ends in this offense scoring touchdowns because it used to be a staple of Ohio State, as you know.
Yes,
it is long since been a thing of the past. For many years, there's been a running joke that the tight ends are just so underutilized, despite some very talented guys that have come through. And it's nice to see those guys get rewarded when they come here. I still got to see more Jeremy Ruckert though.
Yeah, they mentioned Jeremy Ruckert during the telecast. I think they're trying to get him acclimated to the college game because the talent, based on all the recruiting ratings, is there. And as you said, if they can find a way to involve him in the offense, I think that he definitely could figure prominently down the season as well as for seasons to come with that skill set that supposedly he was. I may be misstating it, but I thought Urban Meyer said he was maybe the most talented tight end that he had ever recruited.
Yeah, we'll see how his career unfolds. The tight end spot at Ohio State has been filled with talented guys who have largely gone unnoticed, but it does look like Dwayne Haskins likes to look for his tight end. That's been the case through a couple of games, and I think there were a couple of catches for Farrell. There was at least 1 or 2 targets for Rashad Berry, so they are throwing toward the tight ends this year.
Yeah, Dwayne Haskins has been as good as anyone could, I would say better than advertised. After the first 2 games of the season. Now, granted, let's look at the caliber of opponent. With Oregon State and Rutgers. I'm not trying to sound pessimistic. I'm also trying to let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Like this coming game against TCU is going to be a legitimate challenge. But yeah, Dwayne Haskins, for all of the concerns about how would he do as a starter, he has certainly exceeded my expectations with his performance the first 2 games of the season.
Yes, the arm strength was never in question. The accuracy looks to be quite good, and his football IQ looks great. I mean, he doesn't have. People forget he's not started a lot of games. He doesn't have that much college experience, but he looks like this. The situation never seems to rattle him.
No, he definitely is playing very, very poised. That has been a very pleasant, uh, pleasant discovery, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I would say so. The running game this week, Chip, it looked like the guys flip-flopped. It looked like J.K. Dobbins was the guy finding success this week, and Mike Weber was the guy who struggled a little bit. It looked like Weber was trying to bounce things into, rather than take 3 yards, he was trying to bounce things outside and pick up big gains. Those weren't there this week as they were against Oregon State, but J.K. Dobbins was able to get a couple of explosion plays in this week.
Not only that, I thought J.K. Dobbins, the one play in particular where a pass out of the backfield where, we talked about the weather not being necessarily conducive, but I mean, he, was able to control the ball, go extend himself high up in the air, and to bring it down basically with one hand.
The one-hander, yep.
That was because let's face it, I think J.K. Dobbins, it's not to say that Mike Weber is a bad receiver, but I think J.K. Dobbins is a more natural receiver. Maybe just one person's opinion. It just seems as though that might be more to J.K. Dobbins' skill set. So I think they're going to be a great complement to each other throughout the season. I think they're going to, whoever has the hot hand, we're going to go with, and it just happened to be J.K. Dobbins this game.
Yeah, and Weber only touched it 8 times. J.K. had 12 carries, so 20 between them, 109 yards just for those two guys. So, it's like if you have a feature back and he gets 100 yards, basically.
Yeah, I know most schools there's usually as you said, a feature back, but I think Ohio State they're trying to involve as many players as possible, and in this case, J.K. Dobbins had the better going, but that is not to say that Mike Weber by any stretch is out of the plans for being involved in the Ohio State offense going forward.
Right, and I think Weber was the more successful back in week 1 and Dobbins was in week 2, so that's not unusual. It's not something unexpected. Some guys will just naturally, their style suits different defenses differently. So it'll be fun to watch how those two go the rest of the year. And the great thing about having both of them, and then you throw in a Snead and a Teague as well, is that when you get to November, you've got fresh running backs because you're not. It's like Wisconsin gives Taylor the ball, 20 some odd times, maybe even 30 some games. He's going to be a lot less fresh down the stretch.
Yeah, I would definitely like to include Teague and Snead whenever possible. It just kind of comes back to the Ohio State coaching staff, that whole freshman redshirt year. Do we want to redshirt them? Do we want to have them on the roster? Trying to evaluate and weigh what's not only in the best interest of the player, but also the best interest of the team.
Yeah, and I think that if Dobbins and Weber stay healthy, you may see at least one of them get the red shirt. I think that it's possible that one of them will stay, ready and get in the games just to continue to spell these guys, especially when you get later in the season. But it's nice to know they're there, even if you don't have to use them. It's kind of like having a credit card.
Yeah, with a very high limit. How's that?
It's like I don't really want to use this, but it's nice to know I got one. Yeah, it's good. So I don't think Dobbins or Weber probably expected to be outrushed by Tate Martell in this game.
No, but that goes back to what we were talking about with the skill set of Tate Martell. I think that, taking, when he dropped back to pass and all of a sudden, he was rushed and he took off upfield, and the next thing you know, he saw a lot of open field in front of him and he was directing traffic. And I may get this wrong, so maybe you can correct me. Was it Brian Snead or was it Master Teague that had that killer block that enabled when Tate Martell scored his touchdown late in the game.
I believe it was Snead.
I thought so too, but I like I said, I'm just trying to, in my, like mentally replaying it and, just trying to remember, so we all know that a good way to get on the field beyond, running the ball, and being productive is, making great plays without it, being that active and willing blocker. So Brian Snead, that I'm sure is going to, I would guess, not that, you or I have anything to do about the awarding of Buckeye leaves on the helmet. I would think that kind of play would earn him a Buckeye leaf or two.
Yeah, I would think so. It's maybe the reason that he's come off the bench before Teague.
It's possible.
There's that ability to block, and maybe they're seeing that in practice, and that's what would separate you when everything else is fairly equal.
Yeah, and it's not as though either player looks as like they definitely look like that they pack a mean wallop. I can't imagine what it must be like trying to tackle either Brian Snead or Master Teague when they've got a full head of steam running behind them. So yeah, I think, getting back to what you were saying, like I'm sure nobody anticipated being outrushed by Tate Martell, but the fact that Ohio State wound up with a 52-3 win, the Buckeyes are 2-0 on the season. Nobody was injured, which I always go back to the fact that you want to come out of a game, without any substantial injuries, and they've got their first big game of the season on the horizon, going down to Texas to take on the TCU Horned Frogs.
Absolutely. It's always good to get through a game relatively unscathed, especially these early opponents that maybe not aren't quite up to the level where some of the other teams are going to be down the road, and you never want any kid to get hurt in the college game, but especially in a game where you could cakewalk through the opponent without that player.
Precisely, and Ohio State, they're 1-0 in the conference. The only other team that can make that claim within the conference is Northwestern, because they had that opening win against Purdue. But even Northwestern, they're 1-1 on the season. So Ohio State is looking very good. They're 2-0. They're 1-0 in the Big Ten.
Awesome. Champions of the Leaders and or Legends division.
Oh, what a debacle that was.
Yes, indeed. All right, so before we finish up talking about Rutgers, one guy I want to give a shout out to is our resident bottle flipper, Drew Chrisman, because just a tremendous day booting the ball, almost a 44-yard average. He hit a 50-yarder and stuck two of them inside the 20. So Drew was doing his job.
Yeah, it's definitely the kind of thing where you usually, punters are kind of that forgotten aspect of a team until they make, maybe kind of a, like a shanked punt, it's blocked,
Mm-hmm.
those kind of negative things. And I know Coach Tressel used to say how the punt was the most important play in football and was derided for it. But I always believed that what he was talking about is being able to flip the field and put your defense in much more favorable, field position. I always felt that that's kind of what he was saying. And for the first two games of the season, Drew Chrisman has definitely responded to the call with helping Ohio State out in that regard.
Absolutely. I agree with you that Tressel probably was talking about the ability to, put your defense in a great position. Anytime you can make the other team go 90 yards to score on you, especially when you've got a defense like Ohio State typically has, it's a pretty big advantage. And and same the other way. I mean, we've seen it the other way where other teams have been able to pin Ohio State deep. I know Michigan State did a couple years ago where they continuously downed the ball inside the 15-yard line, and Ohio State had trouble driving on their defense in that game. So it's something that can happen. And you want to have a punter can be a weapon, and we saw that with Cam Johnston, and we're seeing it with Drew Chrisman. So that's pretty awesome. Staying with special teams, Chip, we got to see an early look at Demario McCall at punt returner this week, as opposed to last week when he really came on in the second half. But not a great outing as far as punt returns are concerned for Demario McCall, and was eventually replaced by C.J. Saunders.
Yeah, Demario McCall fumbled a punt that, fortunately for Ohio State, they recovered. Maybe it's just me, and I understand because when it comes to Demario McCall, I think that where I'm going with this is I believe Demario McCall is trying too hard to make something big happen when he gets the opportunity. Maybe it's just one person's opinion. I had the good fortune of watching Demario McCall play in high school because he played for North Ridgeville, which is a suburb relatively close to where I live. Happened to see him dominate against a lot of local competition. And I realized that the Ohio State fan base is very excited whenever his name comes up. I kind of get the impression he's trying to make a big play whenever he gets on the field. And maybe that fumbled punt was that. Maybe it was also, we talked about the weather not necessarily being conducive.
Mm-hmm.
I would just, if I could, I'm just spitballing here, is that, if I would just kind of, I would follow, a certain podcast host sound advice about slowing down to go, to go fast, like the idea of, like let the play come to him. I think he would be ideal. I think not only as a punt returner, but if the opportunity presented itself as a kickoff returner to kind of, he has such, he has good speed, but I think his true strength is his agility, his quickness, laterally, being able to make people miss. And I think, letting it come to him more naturally rather than trying to force the issue. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah. I don't know if you can hear all this thunder going on. It's thundering to beat the band over here.
Well, we've had up here in Ohio, it hasn't been, it's kind of a difficult thing to describe. It's been a steady rain, but it's not been thundering and lightning. It's just been kind of this consistent drizzle. It's not a downpour, and it's not anything that that is that you couldn't tolerate if you were gonna run out to your car or something like that. Like you wouldn't necessarily need a coat, but yeah, it's been we're getting the after effects supposedly that I guess you're getting the full effect. How's that?
Yeah, it's I'm well acquainted with the Ohio constant spit and rain.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's right now it's just crazy. I don't know if it's coming through the podcast, but the thunder is pretty loud. So yeah, Demario McCall, he drops the first one, kind of makes a Jalen Marshall-esque mess of the second one, but comes up with it, and then was replaced by C.J. Saunders, who. He had a nice punt return, a 20-yarder that he nearly took to the house. That was it was nice to see. And I think you'd have to say after two games, CJ probably has the more sure hands, although he gets interfered with more also. Whereas Demario's got he's got the open field ability. I say that, but he did get tackled by a kicker this week.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, and that'll be something he'll hear about from his teammates, if not the coaching staff. So, yeah, C.J. Saunders, I agree. I think he's more sure-handed, but I just think Demario McCall, the talent's there, but I think he's pressing to make something happen instead of letting it come naturally.
Yeah, you may be right on him pressing because here's a guy who probably thought by now he'd be part of the first team offense, and so he knows his touches are limited, so he wants to make something happen, and he always looks like he can make something happen. So I figure at some point he will do that.
I think he's next year going to be firmly in the rotation of that H-back position. Don't forget Paris Campbell will be moving on. Mm-hmm. KJ Hill. I mean, they're losing a lot. With regards to wide receivers and a lot of talent. We talked about how Ohio State always replaces it. Mm-hmm. So it's easy for us to say, "I'll be patient," but I definitely think his time will come. He just has to not try to force the issue as much.
Yes, I believe Johnny Dixon's 17 years of eligibility will be up as well.
There you go. Johnny Dixon. Yeah, good comparison there.
All right. Anything else you want to talk about from OSU Rutgers?
No, I think we covered it pretty well. As I said, I'm very happy that Ohio State, they're 1-0 in the Big Ten. I think Rutgers is going to be not an easy out for the rest of the. I believe, I may be mistaken, Rutgers. I think that they have games against Buffalo and Kansas and Indiana. I might not have the sequence proper. I think those are all potentially winnable games. You're looking at for Rutgers, if they can win, those 3 games, the next thing you're looking at 4-1, and I'm not sure. I don't have it in front of me, but if they can, steal a game, against, or 2 against whoever they're playing in the Big Ten West. I just know that the remainder of their schedule is brutal. That they finish up November brutally. So it's up to Rutgers to make the most of their opportunities early in the season, because the latter part of their season, I think, is very, very difficult.
All right, Chip. Well, before we get on to talking about the third game of Ryan Day serving as head coach on game day, wanted to get your opinion on the Big Ten this week. I'm a firm believer that SEC fans have it wrong, that you don't just root for your conference all the time, no matter what. I root for my school and to heck with everybody else. But what did you think of the Big Ten's look this week? I know there were some wins, but of course the big loss, Sparty going to Arizona State and losing. You saw the Northwestern lost the Nerd Bowl, and of course Purdue did a Purdue thing. What did you make of this weekend?
Well, that team up north rebounded as I suspected that they would against Western Michigan. So now they have to kind of balance that. Okay, are we as bad as we looked against Notre Dame, or are we as good as we looked against Western Michigan? Because I believe they have SMU this weekend. Michigan State, as you said, it's like they were in a tough battle, but I anticipated Arizona State pulling that one out. I believe it was well over 100 degrees at kickoff, which was, I don't care what anyone says. That's always a tough thing to do, to go out there to Arizona and, and Arizona State has talent. So I give credit to Michigan State for even, having that game on the schedule. Wisconsin, they're playing their usual assortment of, cupcakes early in the season. They handled New Mexico. As you said, Northwestern lost to Duke again, which I thought last year was an aberration. Obviously, I was mistaken. Very unfortunate for Purdue to be victims of just very poor on the field decisions, the unsportsmanlike conduct calls that cost them against Eastern Michigan. Nebraska, same thing. They lost a tough one to Colorado,
right.
But the fact that they were playing as tough as they were, Minnesota, and shout out to Antoine Winfield Jr. with the clutch interception at the end that preserved the Minnesota victory. By and large, Indiana is off to a good start. Illinois is off to a 2-0 start, which is, let's see, how they do this coming weekend. I'm trying to think if I neglected anybody in my quick rundown. I mean, the Big Ten, I think by and large, Ohio State, obviously I'm biased, but Ohio State, I think, has truly shown themselves to be the class of the Big Ten so far this early in the season.
Yeah, I mean, Iowa won El Asico.
Yes, I forgot. How could I forget? How could I forget the battle?
I don't know.
So
if you're gonna forget a game, though, you need to forget that one.
Well, that one, yeah, you're talking, 13-3. That was that. Well, I'm not sure if you happen to see that game in a couple weeks. The Wisconsin at Iowa, which I said, this is going to be, probably the game that's going to, be the early determining factor as to who's going to win the Big Ten West.
Mm-hmm.
Wisconsin at Iowa is going to be a night game on the night of September 22nd. So that's a 8:30 kickoff in Kinnick on September 22nd. So it'll be good for Ohio State fans to be able to get that get done with Tulane and get to enjoy Wisconsin at Iowa. So
Yeah, and I could not honestly tell you if Maryland played this weekend.
they did, and they beat Bowling Green. Thank you for
Okay.
reminding me about. Yeah, you see, like I was doing everything off the top of my head, but I certainly, like Maryland, they're off to a surprising 2-0 start. But we'll see let's see if the good times continue to roll for the Terrapins. How's that?
Yeah, it's been a good couple of weeks for acting head coaches in the Big Ten East.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm glad you brought up Antoine Winfield Jr. I am a guy who I don't get wrapped up in star ratings. I don't get wrapped up in body types. But obviously Ohio State's they recruit certain guys that, if you're not a certain body type, they don't look at you. Maybe if you don't run a certain speed, certain time in the 40, maybe they don't look at you quite so much. I'm kind of chapped, actually. I'm kind of a little bit bitter and salty that Antoine Winfield Jr. is playing for a school other than Ohio State. I have to admit that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm my all-time favorite Ohio State player is Chris Spielman, not simply because of how he played on the field, but also for his contributions off the field, especially with his late wife. And Chris, sorry?
Oh, I didn't say anything.
Oh, okay. But what I was going to say is Chris Spielman has said that, in his opinion, Antoine Winfield was the greatest Ohio State player that he ever saw. And the fact that they didn't recruit his son, I can understand the disappointment that Antoine Winfield Jr. is not on the Ohio State roster.
Yeah, and I would say Winfield probably one of my top 5 Buckeyes as well. I'm also a Spielman guy. I actually was. This is how long ago I was in school. I got to see Chris when I was still getting student tickets. So he was the guy. But Antoine Winfield kind of embodied that same mentality that Chris Spielman had. He was a guy who he was just going to get it done. He was going to sniff out the play and he was going to make a play. And for Winfield, what was so impressive about him is that for his size, he never missed a tackle. I mean, this guy if he got his hands on you, you were going down.
Oh yeah, that 1997 the game that everyone remembers. Ohio State coming out on the losing end of that. But Antoine Winfield was, as you said, he was probably one of the best examples of a reliable open field tackler that I've ever seen.
All right. Well, Chip, TCU coming up this week. It's at a quote-unquote neutral site at Jerry World. This is not what I would consider to be neutral territory, given the proximity to TCU. But I think that there will be a lot of Buckeye fans there. TCU had a little bit of a struggle early against SMU. Can we glean anything from that as what is going to happen this Saturday night?
Potentially, I think. I want to give credit to SMU. I have to confess, I watched only part of the first half because it was delayed, because of the weather and the rain,
Mm-hmm.
and got a late start. So where I was going to watch more of it on Friday night. Originally, that kind of was kind of not possible because of the rain, but Yeah, I think TCU is certainly a step up in competition for Ohio State. The fact that SMU was able to stay in the game for at least like the first half, uh, that bodes well for the Buckeyes. I think, because Ohio State has more talent than SMU. I'm more, if there's anything, I'm very concerned on the fact that the TCU side offensively, they've got a quarterback in Sean Robinson who, statistically, when he threw the ball, you'll probably be like at first glance thinking, oh, that's not really that great. Like his stat line against SMU he was 15 out of 28 for 146 yards, one touchdown, one interception. You're thinking, okay, well that's not really that great. He also is, he's listed 6'2", 228 pounds. He had 67 yards rushing, and had a touchdown. He averaged about almost 8.5 yards a carry when he did run the ball. So he is, he's a dual threat guy. Ohio State recruited him. I don't know how intensely they recruited him, but according to Greg Schiano, they did recruit him. So he's one of those dual threat quarterbacks. They've got a couple wide receivers. The one who really, he kind of sparked I don't want to call it a comeback, but he definitely sparked the TCU win against SMU is Kavontae Turpin, who's listed at 5'9", 157 pounds. He had a touchdown, 4 receptions, 64 yards. He averaged 16 yards of reception. But we were just talking about the Ohio State special teams. Kavontae Turpin has 78-yard punt return that was kind of what turned the game in TCU's favor. So
yes,
offensively, it's not going to be an easy, oh, okay, well, they can just go down and handle these guys. I have immense respect for Gary Patterson as a coach when every season, I don't care what magazine, there's usually like, who are the best coaches in college football? And, people are used to Nick Saban and they're used to Urban Meyer and that's all fine and good. But I think Gary Patterson if there's who's the most underrated, his name would be up there, in my opinion. I think what he does year in and year out with TCU, they're not even second fiddle in Texas in the sense of getting the top talent. I mean, like that's usually like where Texas and Oklahoma and Texas A&M and obviously Ohio State has gone down there and plundered a lot of the top talent recently. Much to Ohio State's benefit. But he gets a lot of it's almost like a Mark D'Antonio approach, maybe, with getting some of the talent in Texas and coaching it up. And TCU is always, they're always in the thick of it in the Big 12. They're always well coached, especially on the defensive side of the ball, which we'll get to, I'm sure, in a few minutes.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up next. Turpin obviously did turn that game around. It woke TCU up. SMU seemed to be having, a really pretty easy time of it in some respects. And it was early in the game and all, but once Turpin made that play, it really lifted the entire TCU team. And from that point on, SMU couldn't get anything going on offense. They couldn't stop TCU's, when they were on defense. So it really was a spark, and that's something that Ohio State needs to be aware of, not only in the special teams, but you've got to make the most of your chances. You can't be dropping interceptions. You've got to make sure-handed tackles when he gets the ball in the secondary, because he's got that kind of talent that he can break any play and take it to the end zone. He is their version of Ted Ginn.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. I would just say that do not let appearances deceive you. Just because he is not necessarily as tall or as lanky as Ted Ginn, he definitely has that same kind of explosiveness as a special teams contributor.
Yeah. So the other thing that TCU does is they get after you on defense, like you mentioned. They pressure the quarterback. They stuff the run well. they have some good athletes, and the athletes they have are well coached, like you mentioned. Where do you think is going to be the real problem area for Ohio State? Do you think it will be in protecting Dwayne Haskins, or do you think it'll be finding room in the running game?
I think it's going to be more in the pass protection. Maybe I'm mistaken, but TCU had 4 sacks against SMU, specifically a defensive tackle by the name of Corey Bethley, who's listed at 6'2", 290. He's a sophomore. He had 2 sacks and 3 tackles for loss against SMU. A defensive end by the name of Ben Benogu, who's a senior, 6'4", 249. So you're thinking, okay, well, 249 pounds, that's not that big. Again, those are the kind of guys that, especially within the NFL, they usually translate out to be, like a 3-4 outside linebacker, very effective at rushing the passer. Benogu, he had a sack as well as a tackle for loss, as well as more of a traditional linebacker that they have, senior linebacker Ty Summers, listed at 6'2", 235 pounds. He also had 1 sack and a tackle for loss. So my concern would be, and this kind of goes back to what I mentioned last week on our podcast, is that, Ohio State, they're coming into this game against TCU, and they really haven't been tested in the first 2 games. I mean, and they handled Oregon State, they handled Rutgers. I don't think there are too many Ohio State fans who would say that was unexpected. I mean, we kind of talked about it earlier, in the podcast. Mm-hmm. My concern has always been, and this is just my perspective, is that this game against TCU, Ohio State has the superior talent when it comes to the recruiting rankings, but we really truly don't know how good Ohio State is because they haven't been tested yet. I want to give credit to Tom Orr of the Ozone. He referenced the 1996 Ohio State wins, that began the season, where they destroyed Rice and Pitt in the first couple games of the season. And if you recall, that's when Ohio State, that's when they had to go and play Notre Dame, after in the third game of the season. And it was kind of almost the same type thing. Like, well, how good, is Ohio State, after they've destroyed these teams by 70 something points. Mm-hmm. It kind of almost feels like that 1996 team, that, this 2018 Ohio State team, they're going to be playing against a good TCU team that's well coached, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And Ohio State really doesn't know how good they really are.
Yeah, I always like to play a couple of games before your first big game, because at least then you've gotten guys some reps, you've gotten some game fitness built up, and you don't have those growing pains like you saw a little bit of it against Oregon State, but not a lot because it was Oregon State. So I feel a little bit better about having a couple of games under Ohio State's belt. There were some remarks, what is so-and-so still doing in the game? Matt Millen made some remarks on TV about, why is this guy still in the game? Why is that guy still in the game? Because by the end of the year, these guys need to be able to go the full 60 minutes. And, you're not gaining any game fitness by coming out midway through the second quarter. So that's kind of why you keep getting those guys out there, because you have to have them ready for a game like this against TCU.
I agree with you. And getting back to one of the questions that you asked me a few moments ago about concerns, if there is a positive, is that we talked about this earlier in the podcast with regards to Mike Weber as well as J.K. Dobbins, is that the Ohio State offensive line, now granted, they haven't yet against I don't want to say a superior defensive line, but a good defensive line. TCU has a good defensive line. I think anytime you can get 4 sacks in the game, that kind of speaks to the fact that you have a pretty good defensive line. If there's a positive for Ohio State, is that they have established with that massive offensive line of theirs. I saw it the other day. I believe that Ohio State, they outweigh the TCU defensive line substantially across the board. With everyone being, averaging, 6'7" and 300 plus pounds across the way, I think they outweigh almost every TCU defensive lineman by quite a bit. So I would think that the strategy would be for Ohio State to rely on the running game to open up the passing game. But that's just how I would anticipate the game plan possibly working.
All right. Yes, I would think so. That's you look at a team like this, and that's kind of the way you think you got to attack them. And I think that Ohio State and TCU is going to be a close game. It's going to be back and forth. I think TCU could lead this game, but what do you think is going to be the ultimate outcome between these two teams on Saturday night? What's your final score prediction?
I'm going to break precedent with you. I know how much, how you have an affinity for the number 49, or at least you did for the first couple games of the season. Nothing wrong with that. I think it's going to be Ohio State is going to win. I agree with you. I think it's going to be a little bit more back and forth. I'm going to go with what I just said, that I think the Ohio State running game, that's going to be the difference in the second half, that I think it's going to be, okay, we're going to wear you down. I think Bill Parcells, that was one of the things he used to love when he was the head coach of the Giants, is to, okay, we're just going to wear the opposition down with a massive offensive line and a power running game. And I think that's going to be the Ohio State strategy, which is going to benefit them in the second half. I'm going to go Ohio State 42, TCU 23.
Okay. I think this is going to be definitely a low-scoring game compared to what we've seen. I think both teams will be able to get some points. I don't know. My gut is not always right, but it's telling me 34-26 Ohio State.
Okay.
So a little bit lower scoring. I think maybe running the ball, you're not going to see as many points. When you have more, you're going to see more punts. One thing I will say is that Ohio State has to probably go with that tempo from the first game more so than the more deliberate pace of the second game.
I agree with you, and I think TCU is going to try to do the exact same thing. I just don't know if it's going to be to TCU's detriment, considering the fact that we've talked about Ohio State has the advantage within the defensive backfield. Their defensive backs, they're not as quick or as agile as those TCU receivers, but they definitely have the size advantage. In terms of their corners are bigger physically. And I think they'll be much more willing to play that press coverage at the line of scrimmage and try to out physical those TCU wide receivers if they can get their hands on them.
Yes, my concern I think in this game is obviously Turpin turning a average play into a big play, but also with the linebackers, the way they've been struggling is those quarterback runs, especially on broken plays and scrambles when maybe Chase or Nick Bosa don't quite get there. They're about a step away and the guy tucks it and runs, because the linebackers have been an issue, and that allows a big open space in the middle of the defense, and that could be detrimental. It could TCU could see some big plays in the quarterback runs.
I agree. It's going to, gap discipline and gap integrity is going to be crucial for Ohio State, but I'm looking forward to it. I mean, these are the kind of games that you want to play in to establish yourself as a national championship contender. Ohio State has the benefit of playing this game at night at 8:00. So the whole country is going to be watching to see if the Buckeyes are contenders or pretenders, at least in the early part of the 2018 season.
Yep, this will be a big one. I'm looking forward to it. Should be fun, and we'll come back and we'll talk about it next week. I think you were closer on the Rutgers prediction.
Well, hey, as you said, my man, it's the fact that we were thinking Ohio State would score at least 49. We were pretty close. If anything, I'm not much of a game show aficionado either. So we wouldn't have been disqualified if we were on The Price is Right. Correct. We didn't go over. So,
yeah.
But yeah, I think we thought more of Rutgers being able to score, and and Ohio State certainly represented themselves well. Let's just hope that the positive vibes continue against TCU on Saturday night.
Absolutely. All right, Chip, before we get out of here, big anniversary, I guess, for Ohio State. For us older fans, it's been just 30 years. We just passed the 30-year mark since the beginning of the John Cooper era.
Yeah. As of, I believe it was September 9th, 1988. So I remember it, and I'm not going to put you on the spot here, but I do remember Ohio State opened up against Syracuse, which was the first game of the John Cooper era. I believe that, not that I remember during the game, but I believe that game, Ohio State, they not only won against Syracuse, I want to say it was like 26-9. Somebody can, I'm not Jack Park. I'm not that good. But that I believe Ohio State, they not only won that game, but they also went through that game without any penalties whatsoever, which was, a tremendous accomplishment. Unfortunately, as any Ohio State fan remembers of that era, the honeymoon was truly short-lived because I believe the very next week, Ohio State went on the road to Pittsburgh. It seems completely impossible, but Ohio State the very next week went on the road to Pittsburgh and were completely annihilated by Pitt, like 42-10. So John Cooper, his honeymoon was very short and brief, and he was pretty much on the ropes with the Ohio State fan base from that point on for the remainder of his tenure, in my opinion.
Yeah, I have three really things about John Cooper in that whole era that stand out to me. One is that I was excited that Ohio State hired a coach that beat Michigan in the Rose Bowl. I'm like, here's a guy who can win the Rose Bowl and beat Michigan. And those are two things that he struggled to do his entire time at Ohio State, was not only beat Michigan, but also win any bowl game. I mean, he had really a lot of problems in bowl games as well.
Absolutely.
My second thing that I remember about Cooper is that he brought in just unbelievable buckets full of talent, and it never seemed to come to fruition. I mean, I guess one of the maybe poster children for that would be Alonzo Spellman.
Oh, Alonzo Spellman. Oh yeah, Alonzo Spellman, because he was out of New Jersey, if I'm not mistaken, and he came in and he just physically, he definitely looks up, for everyone that drools over how physically imposing Chase Young was as a true freshman. Michael and I, we can certainly vouch for the fact that Alonzo Spellman had similar accolades. When he arrived on Ohio State's campus, the physical attributes were just, very impressive.
Yeah, Alonzo Spellman would make you believe that the Yeti exists.
Yes. Yeah.
He was he was a beast.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I've never seen a man. I mean, like his arms. Remember his arms, like his arm length, like they would go down to his knees. Remember, like when he would be standing there, like how is that even possible? Like to have arms that long to go down. I mean, I remember thinking like that's not right. That's just not to be that physical. I mean, like how can you possibly have arms that long? So yeah.
Insane wingspan, just incredible, just incredibly built dude. Not only were his arms long, but they were like bigger around than my legs.
Yes.
I mean, he was just an incredible presence. But I mean, Cooper did recruit really well, and I kind of said for years, even while Cooper was still coaching, it's like it's too bad Cooper isn't like a director of recruiting for Earl Bruce. Because Earl seemed to not quite get the blue chip guys, but they always seemed to play way over their heads.
Yeah. I kind of looked at,
except against Wisconsin.
Yes. I kind of looked at the whole the conclusion of the Earl Bruce era and the beginning of the John Cooper era. Like I said, the honeymoon was very, very short-lived for John Cooper. And then, as you alluded, and I can painfully attest to, it's a good thing we don't have Shannon Summers here on the podcast with us, because I mean, like, the profanities, would be being it'd probably get us a ban. But in all seriousness, it almost felt like as soon as the difficulties against that team up north began to surface, that people started to kind of wistfully look back at, Earl Bruce, for all of his, shortcomings. Earl Bruce at least had he was successful against that team up north more often than not. And when they would lose, it wasn't nearly as painful or haunting of a fashion as it seemed during the John Cooper era.
Yeah, absolutely. The other moment that I always am going to be reminded of from John Cooper is standing in the downpour against USC and having John Cooper say, "Well, if we don't get the onside kick, we'll just call the game." Even though there were 2+ minutes in a 2-score game and they had timeouts remaining, that's just stuck in my craw. Is like, here's this guy who comes to Ohio State. He's got USC at home. He's playing in front of his own fans, and he decides to quit. I mean, that really stuck in my craw. I mean, just absolutely. I remember the I forget, it was the Lantern or the Dispatch that had an op-ed piece that said Cooper is a quitter. It was the headline, because Cooper was this big marketing thing that was going on, I think, I forget if it was Kroger or Big Bear, but
I thought it was Big Bear. I might be mistaken, though.
You might. I think you're right.
I am so sorry that I brought this up, because obviously, like, now you're going to be in a foul mood when you're trying to watch your show, so that you can blame me. All of you guys can, with the podcast, fans of the podcast, you can blame me, because I was the one who brought it up to Michael. The fact that it was 30 years ago, personally, and this is, maybe it's just, I'm just getting wistful, is it doesn't seem like it was 30 years ago. Like the fact that we can recall all these details so easily. So they obviously left a mark. As you said, I think the positive contribution that he made was the fact that he established Ohio State as a national recruiting power during his tenure. The fact that he didn't have a successful record against that team up north, or a good bowl record, but he was able to turn Ohio State into more of a national recruiting power. Some of the players that Ohio State landed, like, for example, we're talking about, going down to Texas, one of the very first players, I shouldn't say one of the very first, but one of the very prominent players that came near I guess you could say near the end of John Cooper's tenure, was David Boston, and he was a wide receiver out of Texas. Being able to go out to California, get Michael Wiley, like those kind of guys. It's because of John Cooper's successes as a recruiter that, if anything, Ohio State became a national power in recruiting under John Cooper.
Yeah, it's really true, and it's we would be remiss if we didn't say that there were also some great moments in his career. Obviously, the Rose Bowl win, Joe Germain and company. We saw the sweep of Lou Holtz's Notre Dame teams and that kind of thing. There were a lot of great moments, but it was just a team that year after year seemed to have national championship contender written all over it, and it would roll into November, and it would the wheels would fall off.
I agree. And again, my apologies if I got your blood pressure going here, especially as we're finishing up on the podcast here. But it was
no worries, no worries, Chip. It's those who forget history are doomed to repeat it.
There you go. Good way to end the podcast.
Right. So we'll be back next week, Chip, to talk about the Ohio State TCU game on neutral ground.
Yeah, right.
We'll have Tulane upcoming that we'll be able to preview, and we'll talk about anything else that pops up in the week in between now and then. So Before we get out of here, Chip, tell people where they can reach you or find you on the interwebs.
They can find me on Twitter at Chipminnick, Minnich. Like Michael, I'm a contributor to Hayes and Cannon on the ozone.net. I also contribute for Athlon Sports. So let us know what you think of the podcast, the articles that we contribute. So again, I'm always grateful for working with Michael and the other fine people that we have at the Ozone, trying to give you as much information about Ohio State football as we can possibly deliver.
Absolutely. You can find me at Mike36fan. Yes, that 36 is for Chris Spielman.
Good number.
On Twitter. Yep. Find me at theozone.net. I'm the grumpy old Buckeye. I'll write a piece up after this TCU game about everything that made me want to go out on the lawn and yell at kids in my bathrobe there and everything. So you please read our stuff at Hayes and Cannon and continue to promote the podcast to all your friends, and check out all of the Ozone Radio Network shows. We got some fine ones: the Buckeye Sloopcast, the Acosta Field with Tony Gerdeman. Who am I forgetting? There's somebody else.
The Sons of Schmidt.
Yes. I'm kidding. Of course, I didn't forget the Sons of Schmidt. I used to be a son of Schmidt.
Once a son, always a son.
Always a son. That's right. All right, so on behalf of Chip Minnick, I'm Michael Citro, calling it a day. It's the end of our Silver Bullets podcast. We'll see you next week. Go Bucks.
Go Bucks. Go Bucks.